We're going to be learning Likkutei Sichot, Volume 1, Parshas Lecha. Let's start and see. Nobody knows yet. 10 nisyonot nitnasa Avraham Avinu. It's a direct quote from Pirkei Avos, that Avraham Avinu had 10 trials. Of course, there are two different interpretations in this in the Mefarshim. The Mefarshim that say nisyonot means tests or trials, but there are Mefarshim, like, for instance, the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, who understands nisyonot as nisim. He says he had 10 miracles. It puts a completely different bent on the whole thing. In any case, what are these 10?
It's a miracle that he passed through his tests.
And that, of course, is a miracle. But then he says it's 10 separate miracles. So what are these 10? So if you go through all the Mefarshim and Pirkei Avos there in chapter 5, the whole chapter is built out of 10 this, 10 that, 10, right? All these things. So this is the third Mishnah. Before that, there's V'asara ma'amrot nivra olam, right? And so on. So what are these 10? So now the Rebbe is going to start about this. Again, if you go through the Mefarshim, you could probably make 10 different lists of what the 10 nisyonos were. There's no easy agreement. The one thing that almost everybody agrees on is that the last nisyon was the Akedah. Almost everyone. Who doesn't agree with that? Rabbeinu Yonah. He says it was another nisyon at the end, another test at the end. What was the test? That he had to haggle, and he couldn't find a place to bury Sarah. Why was that such a big nisyon? He explains because Hashem had promised Avram repeatedly that he would give him the land of Canaan, and now when he has to only find a plot of land to bury his beloved wife, he can't even do that. So that was a nisayon. That was the last nisayon according to Rabbeinu Yonah. But it gives a very interesting thing, that all the nisyonos are obviously in Lech, Lecha, and Vayera. The Rambam is the most literal out of everyone. The Rambam in the Pirush Mishnayos, he says that he doesn't like bringing Mishnah. He doesn't like taking nisyonos from the Medrash. So those are Medrash. He wants to find 10 nisyonos, 10 trials, 10 tests in the psukim themselves. And that's what he does. So by the Rambam, we'll see that the Rebbe's question doesn't start. It's very interesting, but we'll talk about this. But most of the commentaries, Echad HaNisyonot HaRishonim, says the Rebbe, one of the first, Ulai Gam HaGdolim Beyoter, maybe the greatest, or one of the greatest, Unisayon Ur Kasdim, was the test that he had when he was in Ur, the city of Ur. Now there were a number of Urs in the Mesopotamia, but this is the Ur of the Chaldeans, of the Kasdim. Why is it called Ur? So the sages say, even though this is a name in Akkadian, it's just a name. It means fire. So they say it was a trial by fire. So what did he do? He was in his father's store, and he wanted to explain to his father, or he just wanted to destroy idolatry, and he destroyed all the idols, and he told his father that the big idol had killed all the others, and so on. And his father was a moiser. His father squealed on him. He was a rat, his own son, and yet he brought him into the authorities, and the Medrash says he was in jail for 10 years, and then Nimrod decided that they would kill him. And the way they would kill him would be to throw him into the furnace. And when he came out of the furnace alive, that fits the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer's theory, that this is not just a nisayon in the sense of what choice did he have. Okay. So according to Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, the choice was in the beginning, at the very beginning, that he could have destroyed the idols and he could have not destroyed the idols. So he destroyed the idols. But according to the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, the simple thing is that he survived the furnace. He came out of the furnace alive. Okay, so that was the Nisayon of Ur Kasdim. And most of the commentaries, except for what we said, the Rambam, they put this as the first Nisayon. Breaking the idols and living to tell about it. Except the Torah doesn't tell us about this. The Torah doesn't say that. If this is such an important nisayon, it's the first one, why doesn't the Torah say anything? Why doesn't it mention anything about this? In fact, it would seem there should be a very good reason to tell us about it. Why? Because it tells us that you have to be ready to perform self-sacrifice, that to be in the world and to be of Abrahamic faith, that there's only Hashem as one and not idolatry, then you have to be willing to pay a price. You have to be willing to be persecuted. Why doesn't the Torah tell us this? But let's just say a very nice gematria about this, that the fact, all of Sefer Bereshis is divided very neatly. The first two parshas are Adam and Noach, the universal parshas. They talk about humanity in general. There's no Jews yet. Vayera and Lecha and Vayera, they're about Avram. Then Chayesar and Toldos, they're about Yitzchak. Then Vayetze and Vayishlach are about Yaakov. And then the last four about Yosef. Okay? So it's a very neat division. But what people maybe don't know is that Lech Lecha, Vayera, and Gematria equals Avram Avinu. It's a very nice thing. But here, according to the Rambam, it's very simple, that all the Nisyonos are in these two parshas. You don't have to go to the Midrash. You just read Lech Lecha and Vayera. You know all the Nisyonos, all the tests that Avram had. So the Rebbe says, there's only a hint to it. Where do we find a hint to it? Afterwards, it's called Nimrod. He made Avram fall into the furnace, or it says this before in last week's parsha in Noach. In any case, the first nisayon that the Torah talks about openly is that Hashem told him you should leave your land and you should leave your birthplace and you should leave the house of your father. And that was a test because he's telling him leave, and he's not telling him where he's going. He's just telling him, look, if you want to succeed in your mission of changing the world, of making the world a better place, you have to leave your home. And that's a very difficult nisayon for him. So says the Rebbe, what's the reason for this? What could we say is a reason for the Torah not mentioning this first very important nisayon in Ur Kasdim, breaking the idols and then coming out of the furnace? Why does it start straight from Lech Lecha? מפני שעניין לך לך מארצך ישנו בעבודת כל האדם מלמעלה למעלה וגם במטה גופה. So the Rebbe says, because this is universal. What do you mean this is universal? This is by every person. Every person has this nisayon. It's a very interesting thing. What do you mean every person has people? We just said that if you want to be of Abrahamic faith, then you're going to have trials of persecution. You're going to be persecuted. So why not tell me about the first nisayon? What's going on here? So one possible answer is, again, you understand the question. I mean, how did this answer the question? He says this is relevant to every person. But if you're going to be part of Avram's faith, you're going to be persecuted anyway. You're going to have to stand against the forces of the world, and you're going to have to not be afraid to break idols. So why is this not relevant to everyone?
If you make this the second one, and breaking the idols the first one, it detracts from the second one.
Why?
Well, after he breaks the idols and his father tells on him, and his leaving home is a little bit easier.
So, okay. But still, the first one is still needed. You're right, that there's a logical reason for it. It makes it easier for him to follow Hashem's command. It's not as big a nisayon. But still, it's not telling us that the nisyonot were not dependent one on the other. The example is that there was suddenly, what's the third nisayon? The third nisayon is Vayhi Rav Ba'aretz. Right away he comes to the land of Canaan, and suddenly there's a famine. Says the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, it was the first time there was a famine in the world. Nobody ever knew what that was. They had never seen anything like it. So what's a nisayon? So what kind of nisayon is that? It's a nisayon because he thought he was coming to the land, but you could say that it's very easy. That makes it easier. Why? Because then it's easier for him to leave to Egypt, where his next nisayon is. So in a certain sense, what's the next nisayon? The next nisayon is that Sarah is taken to Paro's home. So they lead one into the other. It's sort of like they push one into the other. So there is a natural progression between them, even though each one of them is something different. Each one of them is something separate. And on the contrary, you could come and say, now that he's won against Nimrod, he's more popular than ever. And he doesn't want to leave Ur Kasdim. He doesn't want to leave his hometown because now he's someone. Before then, he was just the kid who broke the idols. Now he's the man who survived with his faith. He made the supernatural feat and he survived the furnace. How is that possible? Now he's very popular. And you can attribute that all the gerim that they made in Ur Kasdim were because of his success with the furnace, his ability to tolerate it and to come out alive. So there's different ways of looking at it, but still the Rebbe's question is, his answer is a little strange. What do you mean, the first Nisayon is not relevant to everyone? So we have to say like this, that what the Rebbe is saying about the first Nisayon is that this is what we call not conscious. It's a non-conscious Nisayon. I'll explain in a minute. He goes into it in a moment, but I'm building it up for that. The second Nisayon of going to Ur Kasdim, he does consciously. One way of explaining it is that breaking the idols he did when he was a little child. He didn't do it as an adult. You could come say it's a childish act. Even if he was a teenager, it's like the act of a teenager. It's like a guy who's, when you're in your teens, you're not exactly normal. Why are you not normal? So again, we've talked about this many times, because in the beginning of life, you're more related to tohu, you're more related to the chaos inside. And it takes time for the person to build up an olam atikun, to build up a rectified personality. So something that he did as a child, or as a teenager, or even as a young adult, that's not completely conscious. He's not completely conscious of the repercussions. He doesn't understand exactly what he's doing. He does it, but he doesn't exactly know what it's going to mean for a long time. To say it another way is that a lot of people, this is how you catch politicians now, right? That if they in college they inhaled, right now nobody cares, but it used to be in the 90s, this was a big deal. If they inhaled the marijuana that they smoked, so now they're not fit to be a politician. Probably they're not fit anyway. But this was like the way to find someone. What do? You catch them when they're young. And then you write it up in Wikipedia, and then they can't run away from it for the rest of their lives. So in that sense, how do we know that this is true? It's not a joke. Hashem changed Avram's name. Why did he change his name? Because he's a different person. He's coming and saying, look, you used to be called Avram. Avram was a young guy who broke the idols. He was heated. He was not thinking. He was this, was that. Everybody hated you and persecuted you because of it. But since then you've changed. And how have you changed? Now you consciously decide to stand a nisayon, a real test. And this test doesn't mean that anyone's going to persecute you. It's just the personal difficulty that you have to leave your home, to leave where you're popular, to leave where you're known, to go and start out in a new place. In a certain sense, what is he saying? That as an adult, this nisayon is much greater, but because it's so much more conscious. You so much more understand what the meaning of this is going to be. And this is exactly the point here, because as the Rebbe is going to explain, the first nisayon is in the crown. The first nisayon is in what we call the super consciousness. So one way of saying it is that he was young. He was still not fully conscious of himself. Another way of saying it is that it's Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh, we read this last year in Parshas Bo, I think, in Shmos. We read this, that the Rebbe says you can't take out the natural tendency of a Jewish soul to have self-sacrifice. Don't try to fight it, because every Jewish soul has this. And the self-sacrifice is idealism. That's how it comes out. And you can't fight idealism. The idealism comes out in the young years of the person's life. Sometimes it lasts for a lifetime. But most of the time it comes out in the teen years. So he says, instead of trying to fight it and tell them, no, you should be a normal person. Think about what this is going to mean for your future if you do this. Think about this, think about that. They can't. Because their crown, which is full of Mesirus Nefesh, is banging on them. That's why the crown is called Tohu. Right? In the early Kabbalah, the crown was called Tohu. Because the crown doesn't know about all the cheshbonos of the world. It doesn't know how the world works. It just has this burning desire to do the right thing, what it thinks is the right thing. But it's the right thing from the perspective of a very young person. It could be that it's not the right thing. But in any case, as the Rebbe, you can't fight this. Don't try to fight it. The only thing you can do is you can try to channel it. You can try to channel it, and that's what the Rebbe did with his Miftzayim. So he takes a teenager and he says, go stand on the street corner in Manhattan and ask people, are you Jewish? And put tefillin on them. Which is a crazy thing when you think about it. It's mamish a crazy thing. Only a teenager would do it. An adult person, what are you talking about? Why would I embarrass myself that way? Why would I do something that difficult? Over time, the Rebbe taught people to channel it, and even an adult can do it. Because you still have a crown. But when you're young and you're idealistic and you have fervor, then it's much easier to do these things. So really, the reason that the Torah doesn't say this is because even though it relates to every person, it's not conscious. And by the time you grow up, by the time you become an adult, this whole thing of the idolatry you wouldn't connect to. You would look at it and say, oh, he's a revolutionary. I'm not interested in revolutionaries. Right? Adult person, he's not saying that it's not shayach, that the first nisayon is not relevant to every person. It is relevant to every person. The problem is that it was only relevant until you were 20 years old. And after that, you build yourself a shell, a conscious shell. You become, well habitated in society. You become part of society. And then you understand that breaking idols is being a revolutionary like that. That's not the way to go. So the person would read this. It would be like reading a Wikipedia article about how in his youth he was a terrible person. And then you say, oh, he's another one of these revolutionaries. I don't want to hear about him. But because the Torah puts that aside, he says that's the super consciousness. That's the keter. We're not going to say it openly. Where is it said? It's only said in the Medrash. Because that's the purpose of the Medrash. The Medrash is to build our psychological understanding. So that way, the Torah starts with what is conscious for everyone. And who's he hurting by going out of his birthplace? Who's he hurting by going out of his home? On the contrary, it's even difficult for him. He's not hurting anyone. It's just for him. So that already connects us to him. Here's a story of a person who has an inner struggle. And is trying to do the right thing that Hashem tells him to do. So that's what he means, I think, that this is in every person. Every person understands this. And he's going to now explain why every person understands this. Because he could say, I'm not trying to go out of my home. Why would I relate to him? So says the Rebbe like this. Ha'inyan b'ktsarahu, how does this relate to every person? B'yiridat hanshama laguf motzim anu shnei inyanim mufchiyim. So it says this is related to every person. Avram coming out of Ur Kasdim. The first explicit nisayon. Lech lecha me'artzecha u'moladetecha me'beit avicha. You should go out of your land, out of your birthplace, out of the house of your father. This is relevant to every person because every person experienced this. When did we experience this? When the neshama, when the soul came down into the body. As far as the neshama was concerned, its home, its birthplace, where it feels comfortable, is above. It's not below. So I had to go through the same process. The Torah is now doing psychology also, but it's doing the psychology of an adult. And in fact, you don't really understand this until you become an adult. You can't really understand this. Why? Because the child is not aware of it. He doesn't know that his neshama came down. What does the child feel? The child is not yet in a place of understanding that I used to be something else and now I'm this. But as you become an adult, you begin to feel the tension between your spiritual self and your physical self, and you understand that the neshama, the soul, the spiritual, came down from a higher place, and what's it doing down here? And I can't stand how crude this world is. Right? So you begin to connect with him. So he says there's two opposite statements that the sages make regarding the coming down of the soul into the body. One is also in Pirkei Avos, al kochacha tachai, inyan shelechach. That first of all, it is a coercion. you're coerced to live. The neshama is coerced to come down into the world. It's forced to. It's against its will. Because the neshama, before it was put into the body, came from the throne of glory. We always said the throne of glory means God's providence over the world. That's what the throne of glory means. So Hashem sits on this throne. What does it mean? He rules the world. Providence. I have sovereignty over this. The neshama is part of that. So what does the neshama feel? It feels that it's ruling over the world. But then it comes down into a body, and what happens? It's not ruling anything. Not only is it not ruling anything, even the body it can't rule. Because the body has its cravings, it has its wants, it has all these different mishagas that it has. And the neshama is lost. I used to be part of the throne. I used to have complete control over everything, or at least I thought I did. And now, against my will, I've been thrown down into the body. And now that I'm in the body, I lost everything. I lost all the honor that I had of being with Hashem. But this is the lower aspect of the neshama, that feels that it was taken away from the throne of glory. היא הנשמה כמו שהיא בבחינת טהורה היא. וישנה דרגה עוד יותר נעלית מטהורה. But there's another level, he doesn't explain this here, that there's an aspect of the neshama that remains pure. And there's even a level that's above that. What is he referring to? So simply, what is he referring to? Torah is above the throne. And even beyond that, neshama, etzem neshama shenatata bi, that you gave in me. So there's 3 levels of the neshama that came down. What do we call them? So we say the part of the neshama that mamash came into the body, that's called the part that was in the throne of glory. That corresponds to bina. Right? That corresponds to the world of bria, to the world of creation. The part of the neshama that's above creation, above the throne, that's called tehorahi. It is pure. Even though tehorah usually relates to bina, but here it's very clearly it's talking about a higher level, and this is the neshama as it is in Atzilus. That's what we call the chaya. That also came down, but it's not as far down as the bria part, as the throne part. Then there's a higher level, even more, which is how the neshama is part of God mamish. It's not part of the throne. Because being part of the throne is just being part of the sovereignty. But to be part of Hashem mamash, neshama shenatatabi, the soul that you gave in me, that you yourself, the soul is part of Hashem above, that's an even higher level. But he doesn't go into these because they're not relevant to what he wants to say here. He just mentions it in passing. Just know that the part that really feels coming down into the body, that's the part of the neshama that was part of the throne of glory, that was ruling over the world, as it were. How much time do we have? What time is it? Oh, it doesn't say there anymore.
8:01.
8:01. So let's finish just this paragraph. בגלל גודל הירידה, ובפרט לפי מה שהרבי מביא באחת משיחותיו, שלפני ירידת הנשמה למטה מראים לה את הגן עדן והגיהנום, כדי שתדעת אשר לפניה, הרי הירידה למטה להחיות את הגוף היא בעל כורחה של הנשמה על כורחך החי. So because this is such a great descent, and as the Frierdiker Rebbe explained, that before the neshama comes down to the world, it's shown both the possibilities of its actions, whether it will be Gan Eden or be Gehenom. It's a very difficult descent. It's a very difficult descent. That's why the sage is saying, Perkei Avos, Al Kochacha Atachai. You live a soul within a body against your will. On the other hand, this is only one aspect. We said there's 2 opposites. So the one aspect is that I had to come down. I was coerced. I didn't want to come down. The neshama didn't want to come into the body. Le'idach gisa, on the other hand, למרות גודל הירידה, הרי דווקא ליד ירידה זו מגיעה הנשמה לדרגה הגבוהה יותר מאשר הייתה לפני ירידתה, כמאמר ידוע, ירידה צורך עלייה. Because Pnimius Torah now teaches something more. It says that the descent is for the sake of an ascent, so there's much to be gained. There's a lot to be gained from this. And so in that sense, the neshama very much wants to come down. And so you have these 2 opposites that they describe now. They are the universal human condition, the universal condition of the soul, and they are going to relate to Avram coming out of Ur Kasdim. Lech Lecha me'artzecha moladcha mibeit avicha, that he has to leave his land and his birthplace and his father's home. And we'll explain this tomorrow, starting tomorrow, how this relates to every person and what to take from it. Because the Torah is trying to teach us something. It's trying to tell us something about our lives. So to go back and just recap, the first Nisayon, that most of the commentaries agree was the first Nisayon when Avram broke the idols, it was either in an unconscious state or relatively unconscious, not a mature state, or it was just so natural for him that the Torah doesn't have to tell us anything about it. You'll do this anyway. Nobody has to teach you how to be a teenager. You know how to be a teenager naturally. Everybody breaks idols when they're a teenager. The chiddush is, once you're an adult, are you able to do things that are not in your comfort zone? And that the Torah already wants, because the Rebbe's whole shita is that the Torah is always teaching me a hara. It's always giving me instruction. It's not telling me stories. So things that don't need instruction, it's not going to tell me. But this we need instruction, because this is already in the adult person, to understand what it means that the neshama, what does it mean that the soul came down into the body, and we'll see more of this tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem.